shadows of a fading past, trapped in the fires of time.
Now, here's where Bob can really hit you with a poetic line that is so powerful. We're living in the shadows of a fading past, trapped in the fires of time. Doesn't that describe the human condition to a T? Good morning, and welcome to another episode of The Clarion Call, and another in my continuing series of Deciphering Dylan. For today, I'm going to look at a song from the Bootleg series Telltale Signs that was originally recorded for the 1997 album Time Out of Mind, but never made it onto the album. It wasn't released until more than 10 years later. The song is called Red River Shore. I think it's one of Bob's best. Just shows you how deep his talent is that he could leave a song like this off of an album. I'm going to give what I call a fairly literal interpretation of the song. I find a lot of Dylan interpreters get quite fanciful in their interpretations of some of these songs and find all kinds of things that I don't actually see in the songs. To me, this is just a straight love story. It reminds me very much of the great song Girl from the North Country off of his Freewheelin' Dylan's second album back in 1963, I believe. I've been listening to this song because I put it on my iPhone when it first came out, so I've been listening to it over and over, I guess 17 years. My impression all along has been that this is a follow-up to Girl from the North Country, and he's actually talking about the same woman that he had such a deep feeling for way back when, before he ever left Minnesota. A lot of you probably have already skipped over this part of the video because, as I learned recently, there's something called the Wadsworth Constant, which is a rule that a person on Reddit made up that said that if you skip the first 30% of any YouTube video, you won't miss anything. Well, I hope you haven't skipped this, but in case you have, I'll just go ahead and start the music and then catch up with the rest of my thoughts later. I will have a link, however, to a Substack that I wrote all about the Wadsworth Constant and a little bit about the Wadsworth family, which was my mother's maiden name, and I know quite a bit about. So if you're interested, check that out.
Some of us turn off the lights and we live in the moonlight shooting by. Some of us scare ourselves to death in the dark to be where the angels fly. Pretty maids all in a row lined up outside my cabin door. I've never wanted any of them wanting me, except the girl from the Red River shore.
For purposes of analyzing this song, I did put the lyrics into the video, but I'm also posting them on the screen because at this point my memory is not that great that I can retain the entire verse in my mind and talk about it without a little bit of refreshing. There are 8 of these verses in the song. Each of them ends with the word Girl from the Red River Shore. A little bit unclear, turning off the lights and living in the moonlight, and other people scared in the dark to be where the angels fly. I'm not really sure exactly where he's going with that, but the next half of it is pretty clear. He says there's pretty maids who are all lined up for him, which is probably true if you're Bob Dylan. They're lining up for you. But he says, I never wanted any of them wanting me, except for that one girl from the Red River Shore. Now let's talk about the Red River for a second. I believe that this particular Red River is the one that flows north and forms the border between Minnesota and North Dakota. Bob would certainly, as a native of Minnesota, been aware of that river. It tracks along with the idea that he's talking about a girl that he loved back in the day when he was still in Minnesota before he ever made any name for himself and traveled around the world. There is a song that was well known in folk music circles called Red River Shore that's actually done by the Kingston Trio and a number of other groups in the early 60s. I don't think this has much to do with that song except that possibly Bob took the name and then just went totally in a different direction. Now, he has a history of doing that. If you look at his song Working Man's Blues, that was actually a song originally done by Merle Haggard, and Bob took the name of that song, and he used one line from Merle, and everything else was totally different and totally Bob's creation. I think a similar thing is probably going on with this. There's also a very famous song called Red River Valley, which was an early American song. I believe that song was actually referred to what they call the Red River of the South, which flows down through Texas. So again, I don't think we're talking about the same river here now.
But I sat by her side, and for a while I tried to make that girl my wife. She gave me her best advice, and she said, go home and lead a quiet life. But I've been to the east and I've been to the west, and I've been out where the black winds roar. Somehow though, I never did get that far with the girl from the Red River shore.
So, in the second verse, he tried to make that girl his wife. Didn't work out. She gave him her best advice was to go home and lead a quiet life. Of course, he did anything but that. And as he said, he's been to the East, where he went to New York and became famous. He's been to the West, where he now lives in Malibu. And I've been out where the black winds roar. Again, reference to the winds reminds me of Girl from the North Country, where the north winds howl. I think he's talking about those wild parts of the upper Midwest, where the black winds may be roaring through the Black Hills of Dakota. And somehow he just never got that far with the girl from the Red River Shore. Now, I don't think that means in a physical sense. I think he got close enough physically. But he was never able to convince her, to become his wife. And so that's his great regret in this song and in his life, apparently.
But I knew when I first laid eyes on her, I could never be free. One look at her and I knew right away she should always be with me. Well, the dream dried up a long time ago. Don't know where it is anymore. True to life, true to me, was the girl from the Red River shore. Now I'm wearing the coat.
Before we get into this third verse, I'd just like to say a little bit about the music and particularly Bob's voice, which is just in peak condition here. The way he sings this song is so beautiful. And you'll notice that the music started off softly with just the guitar, and then slowly you start to hear other instruments come in, a bass, some drums, perhaps an organ, and then later on an accordion. Was that by design? Not actually. It turns out that what we're listening to here is the first recording of this song. And Bob was famous for starting a new song in the studio that no one had ever heard before, just letting the band figure it out for themselves as he went. He just started playing this song on the guitar, and then slowly, as you hear, other instruments figured out what the song was and joined in. That's just the way Bob was. He liked the spontaneity. There were some other takes of this song that were not as good as his first take. Accordion was much stronger in one of the other takes that was released, and his voice was not as strong. He got it right the first time, but he didn't really feel that it fit with the rest of that Time Out of Mind album. He knew right away that he would never be free and that she should always be with him. But that dream dried up a long time ago. Don't know where it is anymore. What a sad thing to say, that the dream, there's not even a hope of a dream anymore. It's totally gone. Whatever was there one point, maybe he held on to that dream, but eventually it dried up. Doesn't even know where it is anymore. But his memory is that she was true to life and true to him. He still has very, very fond memories of her, even though he realizes that he's never going to be able to see her again.
Now I'm wearing the cloak of misery, and I've tasted jilted love, and the frozen smile upon my face hits me like a glove. But I can't escape from the memory of the one that I'll always adore. All those nights when I lay in the arms of the girl from the Red River shore.
He's talking about his misery and the frozen smile upon his face and being unable to escape from those memories. But then he says, all those nights when I lay in the arms of the girl from the Red River shore. That pretty much confirms my theory that it wasn't just a platonic relationship. He had an actual physical relationship with this girl. He just couldn't take it to the next step that he wanted to take it. A very sad story, but a story that perhaps many people can relate to.
Well, we're living in the shadows of a fading past, trapped in the fires of time. I've tried not to ever hurt anybody and to stay out of the life of crime. And when it's all been said and done, I never did know the score. One more day is another day away from the girl from the Red River shore.
Now, here's where Bob can really hit you with a poetic line that is so powerful. We're living in the shadows of a fading past, trapped in the fires of time. Doesn't that describe the human condition to a T? And then he says, you know, I've tried to be a good man. I've tried to stay out of a life of crime. But when I think it all over, I never knew what the hell I was doing. I didn't know what the score was. All I know was that every day was another day away from that girl that I loved. I feel you, Bob.
But I'm a stranger here in a strange land. But I know this is where I belong. I ramble and gamble for the one I love, and the hills will give me a song. Though nothing looks familiar to me, I know I've stayed here before. Once 1,000 nights ago, with a girl from the Red River shore.
So he's a stranger in a strange land, but I know this is where I belong. People do recognize that that line comes straight out of the Bible, but what some people have not made the connection is that that was also the title of a very famous science fiction book that came out in 1962 by Robert Heinlein called Stranger in a Strange Land. I think it's a double reference. Bob would certainly have been aware of that book. It was very popular when he was in New York. Won a bunch of awards, actually, in 1963. The strange land that he's living in is the life that he chose as a wandering minstrel, and he rambles and gambles, and the hills will give me a song. What he's saying is that even though that was a terrible loss in his life, it paid him back many times over by inspiring songs such as this. The hills gave him a song, not really the hills. It was the hills of that emotional relationship that gave him so many songs. And then this is a problem as we grow older we all will have. There's nothing that looks familiar to me. I know I've stated before, once 1,000 nights ago. Was it 1,000 nights? Seems more likely it was tens of thousands of nights ago. You know, he wrote this song in 1997. Probably hadn't seen that girl in 35 years. By my calculation, that's well over 10,000 nights.
Well, I went back to see about it once. Went back to straighten it out. Everybody that I talked to had seen us there. Said they didn't know who I was talking about. Well, the sun went down on me a long time ago. I've had to pull back from the dawn. I wish I could have spent every hour of my life with a girl from the Red River shore.
You know, I'm wondering, having heard that line again, the sun went down on me a long time ago, I had to pull back. Does he say from the dawn? That would almost make sense if the sun went down and he has to pull back from the dawn. In other words, he has to stay out of the daylight because the sun has gone down on his life, which kind of ties back to the very first line where he talks about living in the dark. This is almost ghostly the way he describes what happened. He went back, presumably back to Minnesota, to try to see her once again and straighten things out. And then he couldn't find her, but not only that, everyone he talked to who he thought would have remembered her, who was the love of his life and meant so much to him, had no idea who he was even talking about. And some people have taken that idea to think that this song is about some type of ghostly presence. Perhaps the girl died. Perhaps the narrator is dead. I don't go that far, but I think this is understandable, really, that you can go back and talk to people. If you could find the people back in that time, if you could still find any of them. If you said, what about that girl so-and-so? They'd go, who? They don't have the same memory, and as time goes on, that memory fades more and more. In the end, he just says, you know, I really wish I could have spent every hour of my life with her. It would have been better than anything else that ever happened. It's a little hard to believe considering everything that's happened in his life, but he feels pretty strongly about it.
Now I heard of a guy who lived a long time ago, a man full of sorrow and strife. There is someone around him died and was dead. He knew how to bring him on back to life. Well, I don't know what kind of language he used, or if they do that kind of thing anymore. Sometimes I think nobody ever saw me here at all, except the girl from the Red River shore.
I let that play out to just enjoy the music at the end there. And of course, the accordion is kind of the dominant instrument there that's really carrying the melody. And it almost sounds like the band or Garth Hudson playing that, which of course it is not, but it's certainly in that style. So he heard of a guy who lived a long time ago. That if someone around him died, he knew how to bring him on back to life. I think it's pretty clear we know who he's talking about there. That's Jesus. That's the only person I ever heard of that could bring someone back from the dead. But it's a joke. He talks about it, just some guy I knew. Not our Lord and Savior, but just some guy that lived a long time ago. I don't know what kind of language he used or if they even do that kind of thing anymore. And then he gets back to this ghostly idea sometimes I think nobody saw me here at all except the girl from the Red River Shore. That feeling of being disconnected from life itself, that, he lived his entire life. No one ever really saw him. Nobody ever really understood him as well as that girl from the Red River Shore. I don't follow those who will take this one reference to Jesus and say, oh, well, this whole song is obviously about Jesus, or this whole song is about religion in some way, being a Christian. No, I don't see that at all. I think he's just talking about the impossibility of bringing something that's dead back to life, that bringing that relationship back to life. There was a guy who did that once, but it isn't going to happen again. He's not going to bring back this girl for him. I'm giving it a very literal interpretation. Bob has written so many songs over the years about lost love, unrequited love. I go back to songs on Blood on the Track, Tangled Up in Blue. Some of his later songs, Brownsville Girl comes to mind. There's a bunch of them. Mississippi, the common theme in Bob's work, and I think this one here is one of the most beautiful expressions of that.